whatever it is. We've all been there, where we're trying to be this holy person in a very unholy environment. And that's what they were getting ready to deal with. All these nations that were following false gods, right? And they were not to align with the nations. Their contract was with God and God alone. And this is where I want to highlight that verse that I shared with you earlier, Deuteronomy 6:4. This is called the Shema Israel.
Right.
Okay? And it is actually a prayer that is really significant to Jews even today. Many practicing Jews will say this prayer morning, and they will say it at night. And with their kids, when they're lying down, they say it with their kids. Okay? Because this is a really, really, number one type of verse in the Bible type of thing. Okay? Yeah. Deuteronomy 6:4, it says, I'm going to read it again. Hear, O Israel. Listen up, guys. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. There's not many gods, there is one. Kind of reflects back to the beginning of the Ten Commandments, right? And then it says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your strength. And you might recognize those words. I'm positive that you do. Because those were the same words that Jesus said when he was asked an important question. What is the most important commandment? And guess what he answered? Right there. Love the Lord your God, all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind, all of your strength. And so really, this whole series has really been about Jesus in the Old Testament. And so I guess we have to ask that question, right? Where is Jesus in Deuteronomy? So this is one place where you see him. I think just the fact that he quoted Deuteronomy so much is a close connection between Jesus and this book. But first of all, we've said this before, he is like Moses. And I already talked about that a few weeks ago. So if you want to go back and listen to that, the ways that Jesus is like Moses, it's astounding. It's really phenomenal to look at that. And so you can go back online and listen if you want. But let me highlight a couple things in Deuteronomy as it relates to that, okay? So Moses, of course, was a prophet and was known as the greatest prophet of Israel up to, Jesus. And God told Moses about a future prophet that would be like him. And this is in Deuteronomy 18:18. He says, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites. And I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. And of course, we know that Jesus very much was the fulfillment of that prophecy. That he was not just a prophet like Moses, but he was a prophet that was greater than Moses, right? And also like Moses before him, Jesus reiterates the law. His teachings on the Sermon of the Mount, they often follow this pattern. He says, you have heard it said, ... but I tell you, ... Okay? Probably some of those are coming to your mind right now if you've read them before. And so here's one of them. Matthew 5:21. He said, you have heard it that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. Okay, that's from the law, right? He's quoting from the law. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Okay, I just love how Jesus takes the law as if the law was not hard enough for Israel to follow, right? And he says, you thought it was this, but listen, I'm going to make it a little higher level here, okay? So do not murder, but don't hate your brother and sister. That's a little harder. Okay, now, because I'm like, I've never murdered anybody. I'm good, I grew up in a denomination where I heard people say all the time, like, "Oh, I'm going to heaven because I'm a good person," right? Okay, well, sure, you haven't murdered, is what you're saying, but Jesus said, and I'm sure, like, most of us are going to be like, "Oh, wow, okay." So he reiterates the law, like Moses, and then he ups the ante. But then, and this is the good thing, is that he takes it one step further, right? Because he fulfills the law. And he becomes this mediator. Because he is both God and he is both man. He can become the perfect mediator between us, man, and our God. And that's what he did. In the original covenant, there were blessings and there were curses. So blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience, consequences. And so just like if Emily doesn't bring the guy home to meet me first, right? Okay, so Israel couldn't uphold their end of the covenant. You've read the stories in the Old Testament. They flipped and they flopped and they were all over the place and they aligned themselves with foreign nations and they intermarried with their their people, and they started following other gods. They built up all this stuff that God had lined out for them and they had agreed not to do. They did it and they suffered the consequences for it. I read this blog and I love this quote, okay? Unfortunately, I don't know who wrote it. Like, I was trying to find the author, so I apologize that I don't know his name, but if you're listening to this now, my apologies for not quoting you or referencing you, but it says this: neglect this charter, Deuteronomy, for national faith and well-being, and Israel drifts away from covenant. Recover this book, and revival ensues. And so what we see in the history of Israel is anytime they rediscovered the book of Deuteronomy, the law, their hearts became ablaze for God again. Anytime they recovered the book of Deuteronomy, that's how significant this book is. When they recovered the law and read it again, their hearts were broken and they were like, we are so far from God. And their hearts became on fire again to follow after him. And interestingly, there's this portion of the law, and it's kind of about crucifixion. And, crucifixion is known for being kind of a Roman thing, or that's how I've always been taught, that it was a Roman thing. But apparently when there was a capital offense, even in Israel, sometimes the person was put up, okay? And Deuteronomy 21:22, it says this: if someone guilty of a capital offense is put to death and their body is exposed on a pole, you must not leave the body hanging on the pole overnight. I know this sounds kind of gruesome, but listen to where I'm going here. Be sure to bury it that same day, because anyone who is hung on a pole is under God's curse. Okay? And of course, we know that Jesus basically fulfilled this very thing. He, being crucified on the cross, became a curse for us. We know his body was taken down and he was buried that same day. And Galatians 3:3, Paul echoes this verse in Deuteronomy when he says this: Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse. Excuse me. Becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole. I also believe that in the book of Deuteronomy, there's the cities of refuge. And this is so interesting to me, that God highlighted that he wanted 6 cities throughout Israel, throughout the land that he was giving them. And what these cities were for is if someone committed involuntary manslaughter, okay, if somebody accidentally killed someone else, like, okay, my oxens are plowing and I accidentally ran over this guy. I don't know what type of involuntary manslaughter they had, but it was not intentional murder. It was, I accidentally killed somebody. My property fell on them or whatever it might be. Okay, now the person or the family of the person who was killed, they have the right to avenge for that. But God set up this system where that person could run to or go to one of these cities of refuge, and they would be protected. That person could not enter the city of refuge and avenge for that killing. All right? I see this as one of the most wonderful forms of God's grace for his people. And I truly believe that for us and for them, that this was a picture of Jesus. Okay? In a few different ways. One is that these were placed where, throughout Israel, where any of the tribes had access. And I just love that all of us, we have access to God through Jesus, through our refuge. And I love that it was an act of grace for the person who sought shelter there. And I love that Jesus is not only our refuge, but he is our place of grace, where we find grace, despite even the unintentional sins that we commit against God, And I believe that God is asking us to run to Jesus, to find that place of refuge and that place of peace in him. His grace is so great for us there. And then I just want to finish with just 2 verses, okay? This is so cool. 2 verses in Deuteronomy. One is in Deuteronomy 10:16. Okay, listen to this. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer. Okay? All right, so in other words, submit your hearts to God and don't be stubborn. All right? Can I get an amen to that?
Amen.
All right? We like to be a little stubborn sometimes. But check out this verse, okay? Deuteronomy 30, verse 6. Listen to the difference. It's the same verse, but there's a difference between the two, okay? Check it out. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants so that you may love him with all of your heart and all of your soul and live. What's the difference there? What's that?
The Lord will.
The Lord will. In the first one at the beginning of Deuteronomy, or closer to the beginning, he says, circumcise your own hearts. You're stubborn. And then at the end, it's almost like he's saying, you know what? You couldn't do it. I'm going to do it for you. And that to me is the picture of God right there. That when we couldn't do it for ourselves, he did it for us. Let's all stand together. Amen. All right. God, we just thank you for that amazing